10h02 Dakar et 12h à Conakry.
C'est bien ça, correcteur X à 14h. Je prends 5 minutes. Au revoir.
Hello again guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are going to be taking a long overdue look at the Hype Performance Group H145. Today's video is going to be somewhat of a hybrid between a full review and a flight. Obviously we are quite far behind the curve in terms of reviewing the aircraft, so we're going to be carrying out a flight primarily. We'll finish up the video though with a few review details and I'll give my overall thoughts and opinions on the product. We've got a bit of a bumper schedule today actually. We're looking at not only the HPG H145, we're also currently on the ground at LN Designs Pau Pyrenees Airport, and we're also going to be taking another look at the payware version of the PMS GTN 750. It's certainly worth mentioning as well that all of the add-ons we're going to be looking at today, the developers were either kind enough to reach out to me and see whether or not I wanted to feature the product on the channel. That's the case with both the H145 and the LN Designs scenery. I reached out to PMS myself and they were kind enough to give me a temporary access code for the GTN 750. For our flight today, as I mentioned, we're currently on the ground at Pau Pyrenees Airport, located just out to the north of the Pyrenees Mountains. We're going to be operating a medical evacuation flight with the French Civil Security Services. We're going to be heading off into the Pyrenees Mountains out towards the Pic du Midi observatory. Unfortunately, one of the observatory staff collapsed late last night. They're in a stable condition, but they need to be evacuated down off the mountain and taken over to the local hospital. It should make for a pretty entertaining flight. Again, we've got a whole host of add-ons that we're using today. If you do enjoy the video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. Once again, we're going to be carrying out our flight first, and then we'll finish up the video with a little bit of a mini review. So we'll head for the cockpit of the H145, and we'll get the aircraft started up. So welcome to the cockpit of the Hype Performance Group H145. As I say, we are currently on the ground at LN Designs Pau Pyrenees Airport, located just out to the north of the Pyrenees Mountains. It looks like there's a little bit of weather up on the hills, but it should be good enough for us to negotiate our way up towards the observatory. We've just pushed the chopper back off the apron. We are now ready to carry out the power-up procedures. So the battery master can go to engage. And just waiting on the aircraft to carry out the power-up process. Currently running through a power-up test. That should take about 20 seconds to complete. And you can see we now have power-up test OK. Running through an engine fire test. Just to save a little bit of time, we're going to go straight through to the fire warning. And you can see there we have the most civilised engine fire warning sound that I've ever heard. Very nice. We'll do the same on the number 2. So fire test is complete. Coming back up to the test panel, and we'll test the aircraft lamps, just making sure that all of our caution and warning lights there are illuminated correctly. And again, everything looking good, so we'll go back to the off position. VMS page, we'll hit num. Checking the battery voltage, we're looking for a minimum of 23.5 volts, showing 25.1, so we're all good there. And coming out to the VMS page, checking the crew weights. We've got 155 kilos, that's correct. We've got 2 occupants on board. Payload, just going to bump that up. We've got a bit of medical equipment on board, so we've got 30 kilos there. And we can hit previous, and the weights are now initialised for our flight. Onto the F&D page, we're expecting to see engine 1 and 2 fail. Same for hydraulic 1 and 2 low pressure. We've got the aft and forward fuel pump caution, and the pitot 1 and pitot 2 heat cautions, as well as the power up test OK. Flight instruments, HSI showing a heading of around 125. And 125 on the compass, same on the left. For the altimeters, we'll come down to our PMS GTN 750, we'll go to flight plan, Lima Foxtrot Bravo Papa, and we'll go to waypoint info, we'll request the current weather. And showing a QNH of 1016, so we'll set that on the altimeters. And we have 1016 set across the board. In terms of our lights, the position lights can go on, same for the anti-collision lights. We're starting the engines fairly shortly. Fuel prime pumps can go on. And just checking there, we do have the prime pumps on. And we are now ready to start the engine, so the engine 1 main switch can go to idle. We do have N1 rotation, the oil pressure coming up there. N2 rotation. And we have the TOT increasing, we'll make sure that remains within limits during the start. Hydraulic pressures coming up there as well. And the oil pressure now coming up on the MGB. We should see the starter advisory extinguisher around 60%. That's just extinguished now, showing idle. We'll just wait for the engine to stabilise. And looks like we stabilised there around 73% N1. So we'll start engine 2. Same procedure as before. There's M1 rotation. We do have the start advisory. Oil pressure's coming up. And there's our Ryzen TOT. You'll see the M1 on the number 1 there's decreased. I assume the number 1 is used to drive the start on the number 2. So TOT peaking out at around 595 degrees Celsius. Start advisory is out, we have idle. And again, just waiting on that engine to stabilise. So we have 2 good starts, both engines idling around 62.5% on the M1s. We'll carry out a hydraulics test. So we'll go to the number 1 position. And we're expecting to see low pressure on hydraulic 2, which we now have. Go to the system 2 position. And we should see low pressure on hydraulic system 1 and TR shut off on hydraulic system 1. So the hydraulic system is checked, the switch can go back to the off position. The after engine start procedures, the pitot static heats can go on for both the pilot and the co-pilot. Avionics master 1 and 2 can go on. The standby battery can go on. And the LAVCS can go to pilot. Fuel prime switches can go off. The transfer pumps can go on. External lights will take the strobes and the landing lights on now. We're going to be departing very shortly. And on the internal and emergency exit lights, they can go to arm. Co-pilot and passenger ventilation is set as required. The collective lever is fully down. Once again, we'll carry out a lamp test. And again, just checking all of our lamps are illuminated correctly. We're just going to kill the FMS on the co-pilot side there. We're not going to need that for the flight. That should help us a little bit, save a few FPS. And the switch can now go to the pre-flight position. You can see the aircraft is now carrying out the pre-flight test. So we'll just wait for that to complete. And again, it does take a little bit of time for the aircraft to run through the test. And we're showing pre-flight test OK. Once again, the switch can go back to the off position. As far as the autopilot goes, the backup and the autopilot 1 and 2 masters can go on. And the engine 1 and 2 main switches can now go to flight. So we have flight set on both sides, we'll cage both of those up, just waiting for the N2 to come up to around 101%. And we are showing 101% there, so the engines are stable. Coming back down to the PMS GTN 750, we'll just run through our messages. No arrival airport, we're expecting to see that. We've got the observatory as our destination. We've already manually entered the flight plan ahead of time, so we've got Pyrenees and then a set of custom waypoints out towards the observatory itself. And if we come down to map, just zoom out slightly there, you can see that waypoint 1 is just out to the north of the Pyrenees Mountains. That's going to be the town of Lourdes. Finally, we'll just come to charts, and once again we're looking for Lima, Foxtrot, Bravo, Papa, Pyrenees. We can hit enter, and just looking at info, we'll go to airport chart. You can see that the aircraft is located just out to the north of the main runway, so we're going to hover taxi our way out towards the intersection, and we'll depart heading out towards the southeast. Anyway, that's the setup of our H145 complete, and we are pretty much ready to go.
Chaque donc de côté 95, prenez message numéro 2 le 21 janvier à 13h30, unité 330. Roulage Calvi à 13h, unité 300, décollage de Calvi à 13h05.
Okay, so we are all set. We'll feed in a little bit of left anti-torque pedal, and we'll slowly come up on the collective to get the H145 into the hover. Aircraft just starting to get light on the skids, and we're up. So we'll swing ourselves out to the right. We're going to hover taxi our way over towards the runway. We'll join onto the taxiway first. I have to say the aircraft is a little bit of a handful to hover taxi. Once you actually get the H145 airborne though, it's incredibly easy to fly. The aircraft has a lot of sophisticated systems working behind the scenes to make the thing fly very much like a fly-by-wire aircraft. I have to say as well, my rotary skills are nothing to write home about, so that's probably not helping. Anyway, we've got the intersection for the main runway just off on our right. We're going to take an intersection departure. So we'll join onto the runway and then we'll depart out towards the southeast. It's all clear on final. And nothing upwind of us. So we'll just pitch the nose down slightly, coming up on the collective. And we'll use the runway to build up some speed, enter into transitional lift. And again, just feeding in the collective as we go, having to use a little bit of right pedal now to keep the aircraft straight down the runway centreline. We'll go with 65% on the torque. We'll just wait until we're up to around 130 knots. We can start to climb now as well. And we'll just maintain runway heading till we're up through 500 feet above aerodrome elevation. Just come up through 300 feet.
Reçu, merci. À côté 38 circuit vert.
À côté 36 pour le message numéro 5 à vous.
And there's our 500 feet, so we'll come onto our heading of 135. And we'll pitch for a climb rate of around 500 feet per minute. We've got to get the aircraft up to around 10,000 feet before we reach the observatory. So slightly hazy conditions, there's a little bit of cloud just between us and the hills, but nothing we can't negotiate there. Slightly out to the left of our planned track for the time being, but we're just going to navigate our way visually out towards waypoint 1, which again is the town of Lord. Looks like we're coming over a racetrack. There's one out to the left and one out to the right. And just coming up on the town of Pau itself. Keeping a good eye there on our airspeed. We don't really want to be going any faster than 140 knots. We'll just adjust our pitch to maintain the speed. 130 knots will do us for the time being. You can see that we do have a message there on the PFD that is linked up with the PMS GTN 750. And the message there just showing that we need to set a course of 134, but that's automatically been done by the aircraft. For the time being though, we'll just maintain present heading. I'm actually going to be picking up a river that we can follow all the way in towards Lord itself. Anyway, a very beautiful part of the world, and the LN Designs Pau Pyrenees Airport is a nice piece of scenery from them. I imagine it's mostly going to appeal to the French flyers amongst you, but it's certainly a nice little gateway into the Pyrenees Mountains. Originally I had planned a different flight for the H145 review, but once I saw that I was going to be taking a look at the scenery and I saw that this livery was available for the H145, I thought it would be the perfect flight for the aircraft, perfect test run. And the Pyrenees Mountains are very beautiful, so well worth checking out, even if you do it from a different airport. I think we might take another trip out from Pau at some point in the future, possibly out towards Andorra. I quite fancy running the Figure Magister as well around the valleys low level up in the mountains. But again, a nice piece of scenery from them, pretty detailed overall. I believe the airfield is both military and commercial. It looks like the commercial side's been modelled pretty well. The military side is a little bit more Spartan, but that's probably to be expected in the sim. So just coming up through 3,300 feet on the Barrow altimeter there. So we've still got around another 7,000 feet here in the climb. The Pic du Midi observatory is right on the peak of one of the higher hills up in the Pyrenees. As I mentioned as we were taxiing out though, once you've got the H145 into the cruise, the helicopter is incredibly easy to fly. It's essentially fly-by-wire in terms of its handling characteristics. You just set the attitude that you want and the helicopter will maintain that for you. I've got my hands completely off the controls at the moment. As you can see, the helicopter is stable as a rock. Quite unusual for a helicopter. Most rotary aircraft are rather unstable in nature, of course. And in that respect, the H145 is actually quite a good option for beginners, I would say. It's again a very easy helicopter to fly. It also has a number of difficulty settings which we'll take a look at later on. I have to say, overall so far I've been very impressed with what I've seen from Hype Performance Group and the H145. Of course they were the team behind the H135 as well, which is an excellent piece of freeware. I highly recommend going and checking that out. And it's always very commendable when a developer puts out a piece of freeware ahead of a payware project. Obviously it gives you a good feel for their work and their level of quality. And honestly, the H135 is nearly every bit as good. There are certainly improvements to the H145. But the H135 in its own right is still a very solid offering. Okay, so we're just approaching the lake. We've got another 2 minutes to run inbound towards the town of Lourdes. You can just make that out at our 11 o'clock. That speed just creeping up again there, so we'll just come slightly back. Increase that rate of climb. We'll come further back on the torque as well. We'll go for around 60%. And we're coming up on 8,000 feet, so we've got another 2,000 feet here in the climb. And then we'll level off. The observatory itself is pretty much bang on 10,000 feet. OET currently 4 degrees outside, so we'll definitely try our best to avoid this cloud. We may even level off a little bit early for the time being, and then later on we can pick our way through and climb up to 10,000. I think that's what we'll do, otherwise it does look like we're going to be in the cloud layer. So just pitching ourselves back down to straight and level. And coming off the torque, we'll go for around 53%. Just come slightly further back. It looks like we're getting a little bit of acceleration there, still at 50%.
1042 de circuler, je vous écoute.
Et donc Airbus, message numéro 6, message d'arrivée.
We'll go with 46% for the time being. So nicely established now in the cruise. Once again we have a message. I assume it's just another heading change. And sure enough, set course to 119. Just coming up on waypoint 1. The flight plan itself doesn't quite draw correctly, that's no fault of PMSO, that's just the sim as per usual. So we're arriving at waypoint 1. We're going to be tracking out towards the south and then we'll go back out towards the southeast. And then we're actually going to cut back out to the east, just up this valley you can see. We'll talk more about that as we approach. So we have Lord just passing down on the left, you can see the train station, just passing off the pitot tube. That's actually our turning point for waypoint 1, but we'll cut the corner slightly here, we can see the valley. So we'll turn now onto our southerly heading. I've never flown a rotary aircraft, so I can't really comment too much on the flight modelling of the H145, but overall it seems pretty solid for a sophisticated helicopter of this nature. Again, it feels very much like a fly-by-wire fixed-wing aircraft to fly, at least once you're in the cruise. The only issue I could really see that does feel a little bit off to me, the aircraft responds incredibly quickly on the collective input. It drops pretty quickly if you come off the power. I would imagine in reality is a slightly more gentle change in flight path. And as usual, considering that the sim currently doesn't even support rotary aircraft, it's really amazing to see the likes of Hype Performance Group and Flying Side managing to actually produce these sorts of aircraft currently in the sim.
Dame 1682 circuiseur, j'ai bien pris votre message, à tout à l'heure à 16h sur Marvelette 2. Tout à l'heure. Circuiseur, le total 1496. 1496 de circuiseur, je vous écoute. Oui, bonjour, le total unité 4 pour 96 pour le message numéro 2.
And with the aircraft systems, they're pretty comprehensive. You can see as well, though, it does a whole load of performance calculations for us. Again, I'm no rotary expert, so I'm not going to go into those in too much detail, but essentially I believe you have various weights at which various contingency scenarios can be planned out. So for example, we've got what I assume is 1 engine out, 2 minute performance factor there. I'm not quite sure what that refers to. I've got the same for 30 seconds, and I would guess this is all engine out. The Cathay VTOL, again, I'm not too familiar, but I have come across a few rotary pilots over the years, and I was discussing with one. Basically you have different contingency plans for an engine failure during the takeoff and the landing at various weights, and I believe that's what that refers to. Again, I can't say that I have enough knowledge to specifically tell you how accurate those figures would or wouldn't be, but it's great to see that Hype Performance Group have even gone to the effort of modelling those in a cosmetic sense. Turning back onto a southeasterly heading up the valley off the nose, and you can probably just make out the valley that we're going to be peeling off back towards the east. If we come in slightly further on the map range, we've got Lima Foxtrot Mike Bravo, and the observatory is just out to the north of the airfield. Once again, as ever in Microsoft Flight Simulator though, the scenery and the weather just absolutely stunning. Really enhancing the overall immersion of the flight. And luckily for us, using live weather here, the cloud base is just above the hills. Just losing a little bit of speed there, so we'll come back up to around 50% on the torque. We are in a slight climb here as well, but that's fine, we'll keep that for the time being. Obviously we still need to get ourselves up to 10,000 feet. Just come slightly further up on the collective. We are just brushing the bottom of this cloud base. The OAT is now 3 degrees outside. In terms of our fuel state, we've still got 311 kilos, that's more than enough. We've just got to make our way. We've got 4 minutes pretty much now out towards the observatory, and then we're just coming back down off the hills. The observatory, I think, is just out at our 10 o'clock on the peak of the hill there. A little bit tricky to make out at the moment though from this distance.
Madame 1042, j'ai bien pris votre message et pour l'OPC crash, je m'en occupe tout de suite.
Merci beaucoup, et bien bon week-end.
And just looking again at our map there, yep, we've still got a few miles to run. We're currently on a 5 mile range, so I'd say the observatory is about another 5 miles. We're doing about 130 knots, so about 2 miles a minute. So we've got about another 2.5 minutes inbound. And you can see there the FMS2 computation agrees. We've got 2 minutes to run. And just coming up on our 10,000 feet. The observatory itself is located pretty much bang on 10,000, so we'll level off. Getting that speed creeping up. I think we're getting a few gusts and a bit of shear here off the hills. You can see the aircraft just getting slightly bashed around. H145 as well is a really good observation platform. Again, it's so easy to fly the aircraft. You can just take your hands off the controls, put it into the attitude that you want, and really have a good lookout as you're flying. A lot of helicopters, it's a lot harder to do that, as you've really got to concentrate on actually flying the aircraft. So the observatory is out at our 10 o'clock. It's actually just shrouded slightly in cloud at the moment, but we can see it. We're still visual, so we should be okay to carry out the approach. And we've got Lima Foxtrot Mike Bravo almost off the nose. That's just out at our 11 o'clock. As you've already seen, the PMS GTN 750 actually integrates with the H145 very nicely overall. And just as with the H135, there's both a freeware and a payware version of the PMS unit. So even if you don't want to pick up the payware version, which certainly has its benefits, for example, Navigraph chart integration is a real benefit of having the payware version. Similarly, the METAR functionality that we looked at there at the start of the flight, only available on the payware unit. But the freeware unit in its own right is good. It's a significant improvement over the default units in the sim. And whichever GTN unit you prefer, whether it's the TDS version or the PMS version, having the 750 in the sim is nice because they're all touchscreen, of course, as we've seen. Generally, I find that's a lot easier to set up in a sim than having to flick around between various switches. Sometimes the click spots can get a little bit fiddly. Hopefully you can probably see the observatory a bit more clearly there yourselves now. It's off the peak of the highest hill out at our 11 o'clock there. What we'll do, we'll head straight inbound, we'll see what the wind's doing. There should be a windsock just off the helipad. And we'll just make a nice slow steady approach inbound towards the observatory itself. We'll start coming back on the collective. We'll start slowing the H145 down as we make our approach. We'll come in from the south and overfly the observatory.
Allez, sur le côté 1681, message numéro 3, transmettez urgent routine le 21 à 13h30.
And actually we do have nice clear conditions around the landing area. That bank of clouds further out towards the north by the looks of things. Just coming back through 100 knots. We'll set up a shallow descent as well. So you can just make out the windsock. It looks like we've got a very stiff wind out from the south around a heading of 210, so we'll come back in from the north, make our approach onto the landing platform. Just track outbound momentarily to put a bit of distance between us and the observatory. And that'll give us time to lose a bit more speed here and lose some altitude.
1496 de circuit c'est vers le PAX 17, c'est correct, non?
C'est correct.
So once again we have our landing lights on. No cautions or warnings displayed there, we are good for the landing. And we've still got just coming below 300 kilos of fuel. So plenty of options here. If we don't like the first approach, we can go around and try again. Okay, so we do have ourselves nicely aligned here with the windsock, although the wind is varying around quite a bit between the south and the east, so that's making following the wind direction a little bit more tricky. In terms of the landing platform, that's a bit difficult to make out with the snow coverage, but that's off on the right hand side of the rooftop. And obviously we want to keep the 145 away from those barrels out on the left. Slightly gusty conditions here as well, but it's making for a nice challenge. And luckily the 145 does tend to want to turn itself into wind, so it's making following the wind direction a bit more straightforward. The wind just shifting back out towards the east again. Certainly providing a nice challenge, it's great fun, and it's a good reminder of why I need to do more rotary flying on the channel. Anyway, we're just going to inch our way forwards towards the platform here. That wind shifting back round towards the south. A bit tricky to make out our ground speed as well with the snow coverage on the roof. Bit of a gust there. We'll try and keep ourselves stationary, just coming off the collective. And there's touchdown off the collective. We'll get the engine main switches back into ground idle. So just uncaging those. And back to idle. We're going to shut ourselves down here. It'll be a while before we've got the passenger on board. So the fuel transfer pumps can go off. Pitot heats can go off. Avionics Master 1 and 2 are both off. The standby battery can go off. Landing light and strobe light can go off. And just getting the rest of our electrical consumers off. So the emergency exit lights can go to off. I think we're all good there on the rest of the overheads. And we'll get FMS2 off there as well. We've had our 30 seconds, so we are good for the shutdown. We'll shut down engine number 1 first. And we do have a good run down there, the M1 falling off. We'll do the same on the number 2. And a good run down there on the number 2. So the rotor is winding down, we'll get the anti-collision lights off. And lastly the battery master can go off. So that's our shutdown checklist complete. We'll get the doors opened up momentarily. We'll get our passenger on board and we'll be making our way back down the mountain towards Pau Pyrenees Airport. Once we're on the ground back there, we'll finish up the review, taking a bit of a closer look at the H145 in terms of its modelling and texturing. And as usual, we'll wrap things up with my overall thoughts on the product. So there you go guys, I hope you enjoyed our outing in the Hype Performance Group H145. I know that I certainly did. It was a nice change of pace doing some rotary flying once again on the channel. And I'd say the 145 coming along very nicely overall as a product. It's worth bearing in mind that the product itself is technically still early access, We'll talk more about that later on, but given that the aircraft is broadly priced at the same sorts of levels as a fully complete product, we're going to be treating it as one more or less for the sake of the review. Overall, hopefully throughout the flight you should have got a good feel for the modelling and texturing quality of the aircraft, at least on a broad scale. We'll just take a slightly closer look at some of the modelling details on the 145, we'll do the same in the cabin as well, just to try and cover off some of the areas that we might have missed during the flight. The external modelling detail of the 145 is certainly very good. I would say it's broadly on a par with most of the high-end competition in the sim. I thought the rotor hub assembly here was quite a good example of the level of attention to detail that the developers have paid towards the aircraft. And similarly, all of the panelling seems to be pretty good. There's no particularly rough edges, everything lines up nicely. Again, in terms of levels of attention to detail, you can see we've got the little inspection panel there just off to the right. HPG could easily have just gone for a simple glass texture there, and instead they have gone to the effort of modelling what's behind the inspection portal. So overall I would say that externally the helicopter has been recreated in a nice fashion. I think there are still one or two areas that could use improvement, but then the H145 again is still early access. And the areas that I feel could be improved are very minor, it's really just a question of texturing certain parts of the airframe. The same goes with the cockpit really. I have to say that Hype Performance Group have done a very nice job with the internals of the aircraft. We saw plenty of that during the flight of course, but once again we'll just take a look at some of the finer details that we perhaps didn't get to see. For me, the modelling and texturing of the cyclic really exemplifies the level of quality that's gone into the product. As you can see for yourselves, the modelling is very nicely done and the texturing right up there with some of the very best developers in the sim. The colouring is absolutely spot on, and HPG have even gone as far as putting the appropriate fingerprint markings there on the cyclic. For me it's those sorts of details that really just show how much care and attention has gone into a product. Similarly, the cabin that we didn't get a chance to look at during our flight is modelled and textured very nicely. We do get a couple of different variants with the product as well. We get both the standard passenger cabin, a luxury version of the helicopter, as well as now a military variant. All of the doors of the aircraft open and close, and we can also add models both internally and externally for both the pilot and the co-pilot. I did have a couple of little issues there, but again we'll talk about that during the conclusion. Lastly, we'll just take a quick look at the onboard tablet. Obviously the aircraft does also integrate very nicely with the PMS GTN 750, and of course we've seen that throughout the flight. In terms of the onboard tablet though, we get three main menu options. We have setup, equipment and the options menu itself. In terms of aircraft setup, you can see it gives us the current version of the aircraft that we have installed. It has the gameplay mode, which gives us the ability to operate the aircraft realistically or in a more arcadey fashion. As I mentioned during the flight, I think that's a great option for anyone that's new to rotary aircraft. It certainly makes the H145 a lot easier to control in the hover and during the taxi. Once again though, whether you're operating the helicopter realistically or otherwise, once you get up into the cruise it's a very easy rotary aircraft to fly. We also have some custom control options, which is nice. We have cyclic sensitivity, a cyclic dead zone and a pedal dead zone. I was just running the default settings for the flight today, but of course you can adjust those to suit your needs. And lastly, down at the bottom we have the option to either start the helicopter cold and dark or put it into a ready for takeoff state. In terms of equipment options, we have a whole host of available selections there. We had most of the equipment options installed for our flight today, and some of the options do vary based on the variant of the H145 that you're flying. Overall though, it's really nice to see this level of customization available, and certainly quite impressive to see from an early access product. And the options menu, broadly what you might expect. We have the option to change the various units that the instruments give us. We can also turn on or off a couple of visual effects. We can choose whether or not the parking brake status displays here on the tablet. And we can choose whether or not the pilot models are displayed externally, although again I did have a little issue there which we'll talk about in just a moment's time. On the main menu of the tablet it also comes with a whole host of features, including a world map and appropriate checklist for the aircraft. So overall, of course, onboard EFBs are becoming pretty standard now in Microsoft Flight Simulator, but this is certainly one of the better and more comprehensive implementations that I've seen. Overall, there's no doubt that the H145 from Hype Performance Group is a strong offering in Microsoft Flight Simulator. As usual, just to finish up the review, I'll try and run through my overall thoughts and opinions. We'll try and break the product down into a few categories and give it a little bit more detail. So again, I think it's very obvious that the Hype Performance Group H145 is a very nice offering for the sim, particularly given that the aircraft is still in early access. Again though, I don't feel that the product has been given an early access price point. It's retailing at $50, currently on sale for $43. Usually of course it is always nice to see a hefty discount if you are buying a product early access. At the end of the day, you are taking a little bit of a punt as a customer of an early access product, and I think it's only fair that you save a good chunk of money as a result. That being said, there are a few factors in this particular case that I do feel mitigate the situation for Hype Performance Group. Firstly, and most importantly, the H145 is pretty much already in a fully complete state, to be fair to the aircraft. Officially, of course, it is still in early access, and I would hope to see improvements going forward. But I've certainly seen far less complete, far less competent aircraft from large developers claiming to put out a finished product. So whilst I do feel that the H145 is at the upper end of the spectrum in terms of the pricing, overall I think the cost is justified, the quality is there. Most of the details that to me make the aircraft still feel a little bit early access I think will be finished up. And overall I think we're already looking at a really great helicopter for the sim, but it should be all the better of course once it's complete. The second reason why I say the early access status versus the pricing is somewhat mitigated. Of course Hype Performance Group have already put out the H135, again a really nice freeware offering, so you can already get a feel for the developer's level of quality. HPG are of course a newer developer into the sim, but they have made it very clear what they're capable of. Anyway, we'll run through all of the usual main categories just to finish up the video, and I'll give you my thoughts on how the H145 stacks up. Firstly, graphically, a very nice piece of work from Hype Performance Group. The H145 looks great both internally and externally. Externally, I would say that the aircraft is broadly on a par with the better developers in the sim. Internally, I would say that it's right up there with some of the very best. The modelling is very decent throughout, and the texturing very crisp and very clear. The colouring used in the textures looked to be pretty accurate, and in terms of the panels they were very easy to read throughout. Systems wise, the H145 also seems to be a very solid effort. I was actually quite surprised just how much systems fidelity was modelled in the aircraft. It was great to be able to carry out all of those pre-flight tests, they're a nice touch. The same goes with the performance calculations there on the VMS screen. Again, I'm not all that familiar with rotary aircraft. I wouldn't say that the H145 feels to be study level, but it certainly feels to be a cut above your average aircraft in the sim in terms of systems fidelity. It was nice as well to be able to fully integrate the PMS GTN 750. I believe integration for the TDS GTN XI will be added at a later date as well. That really enhances the overall capabilities of the aircraft, and it does go a long way towards introducing more realism into the airframe as well. The flight model would be a pretty hard one to give any concrete estimates on, but I do have a few thoughts and opinions. For the most part, I do feel that the H145 feels pretty good in the hover, although I do feel, as I say, that the aircraft perhaps responds a little bit too abruptly to collective inputs. The aircraft's response to the collective does feel a bit digital, and I think it's fair to say of the H145's flight model in general that the aircraft does feel a little bit more like a piece of programming as opposed to a living, breathing rotary aircraft. And the 145, whilst I believe it is true to life that it's very stable in the cruise, was perhaps just a little bit too rock steady. I noticed myself when looking back at the external shots during flight, it looks a little bit uncanny just how stable the aircraft actually is in flight. All of that though, again, just guesstimations on my part, I could be entirely wrong. And again, it is worth reiterating, firstly that the aircraft is still in early access, and of course Microsoft Flight Simulator still doesn't actually support rotary aerodynamics, so it's really impressive to see what the Hype Performance Group team have managed to achieve overall. Sound-wise, I like the aircraft overall. I thought the external sounds were great, the internal sounds pretty good as well. I did have a couple of sound issues with the aircraft, although they're fairly minor in nature. For example, the caution and warning system is rather quiet, quite difficult to hear. Click sounds as well on the switches, I couldn't actually tell whether there were switch sounds or they were just very quiet. Personally though, I would like to hear some louder, more solid cockpit control sounds. I know it's probably somewhat unrealistic to hear the click of a switch with two jet engines operating behind you, but obviously in the sim we don't get any tactile feedback, and I think that cockpit sounds really make up for that. We've talked about the price already, and again I do think it's at the higher end of the spectrum, but I think it's also worth noting that in terms of value for money, overall you do get quite a bit of value for money with the 145. The aircraft does come with a number of variants, both civilian and military. You get a handful of paint schemes for each, and again you do get a number of options in terms of equipment and layout of the aircraft. The 145 is much more customisable than most add-ons that we've seen in the sim to date. There are still some details though that I would like to see touching up, one of my main ones being the pilot. It's probably just a bug with the current build that I was looking at, but I found that if I restarted the flight without going back to the main menu, then the pilot model was no longer visible externally. And similarly, the H145 uses the custom default Asobo pilot models. I don't take any issue there, but the pilot is currently modelled such that he or she does have their hands just sitting in their lap. That looks a little bit strange at the best of times, but certainly in a rotary aircraft it looks rather out of place. So there are still certainly a few details with the helicopter that do make it feel a little bit more early access. For example, the pilot model, the switch sounds, the fairly quiet GPWS system. Lastly, I did notice a little bit of stuttering throughout the flight, but I think that's a Sim Update 8 issue as much as anything else. Overall though, the Hype Performance Group H145, once again a very solid effort for the sim, and it is really nice to have a decent rotary aircraft option. Certainly if you are into your rotary flying, I think you'll get a lot of fun out of the aircraft. The flight physics within Microsoft Flight Simulators certainly aren't up to the standards of DCS or X-Plane just yet, but of course the scenery somewhat makes up for that in terms of the utility of a rotary aircraft. I think as well, with the quality of the freeware H135, Hype Performance Group is certainly a developer that's worthy of support. So thank you very much to them for letting us take a look at the aircraft today. Similarly, thank you very much to LN Designs for letting us take a look at Pau Pyrenees Airport. Again, a very nice piece of scenery. I think if you're particularly interested in flying in the region, it's well worth taking a look at. As I said during the flight, probably of more interest to the French flyers amongst you, but certainly a nice little gateway into the Pyrenees Mountains. And lastly as well, thank you to PMS for letting us take a closer look at the PMS GTN 750. As with almost everything flight simulation related, both the PMS and the TGS versions of the unit have their advantages and disadvantages. With the PMS unit though, it's really nice to have Navigraph integration, the same goes with the METAR functionality, and for me that added functionality is really where the strengths of the PMS GTN 750 lie. Anyway guys, as always I do hope you enjoyed our outing. If you did, please consider giving the video a like. If you want to see more content from the channel, then please consider subscribing as well. As ever, a very big thank you to my channel members and patrons for all of your support, it's very much appreciated. I hope that all of you are having a great day wherever you are, take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.